I want to thank you all for phoning in. This is our 11th session of the IBIU BIM course. So for those of you who have attended them all, thank you very much. This one is focusing on the Project BIM Leader. So just a reminder that we are AIA certified to provide continuing education credits. This course qualifies for 1 general learning unit. And if you're an AIA member, please at this moment enter your AIA number into the question pane of the webinar, and your credit will automatically be entered onto your account. If you carry a license in any other jurisdiction, when you receive the AIA certificate, please do your self-reporting for your qualified structured learning. Okay, the description, we're going to just focus on accountability with respect to BIM implementation. And we'll talk about aspects of the Project BIM Leader role, what it means, how you define what the role does, and we'll talk about the BIM execution plan. And a lot of this in the previous sessions, I kept alluding to the Project BIM Leader. So we want to understand the role, understand what it means to have it, how to scope, schedule, and budget the role, what's contained within a BIM execution plan, how it transcends disciplines and phases, and how the role can be staffed on projects. As with all the sessions, we'll go through a quick BIM recap. So the definition of BIM, again, BIM is both your verb and a noun. The first definition is the verb, the process of generating and managing digital representations of physical and functional characteristics of places. It's a nice way of saying, look around the space you're sitting in. Any one of the components or the assets you see could be managed in a virtual environment, both representing the virtual geometry as well as information associated to the components that you're looking at. BIM is also a noun, and it's the files, which are often 3D models plus information. You could have a collection of some 2D information, so intelligent schematics, for example, or 2D models with embedded information. All of that comes together to support decision making. Various types of software are used by individuals, businesses, agencies, owners, etc. when they're planning, constructing, designing, constructing, and operating anything. And it literally means anything. BIM can be applied in a scaled manner, and that's a critical thing. So it's not just your big monster project, but the smallest of projects. And we'll talk about that in the next session, some example projects, regardless of whether it's a building, so vertical infrastructure, linear infrastructure, or a system in our intelligence sector. Collaboration and planning are critical, the most critical aspects. Last session we talked about collaboration. This session is really about the planning. And the planning really can be boiled down to what am I BIMing and why am I BIMing it? You've got to answer those questions when you're doing BIM. BIM is geometry plus information, and the extent of how much geometry you model and how much data is included in that model are scalable to meet the needs of the project's BIM goals and the scope of the purpose of why we're doing BIM. BIM is also components from the macro to the micro level. So this diagram shows a guardrail that's part of a bridge, that's part of a road, that's part of a road network. So you think when you look in the rooms you're in, every single component is inherently tied to some other aspect. So the chair to a table to a room to a floor to a building, which is then on a street, in a city, etc. And you can just keep going more macro and macro. So you're tying information digitally to its geospatial location as well as to some of the characteristics about the component itself. BIM connects information, so you may have a model that virtually represents an item. It may have an ID, which can then be connected to schematics, specifications, operations manuals, operations screens, and who knows what else. When we took the course on asset management, talked a lot about tying the information together. In North America, the term BIM uses is used a lot. So you have a model, what do you want to do with it? So it's again, why are you modeling? Most often it's for those orange or those base BIM uses to make drawings and schedules more efficient. If it's not more efficient, stop and ask why, because that's the purpose. to visualize, to understand what you see, what the design is about, to make more educated decisions, or to form a basis for more advanced visualizations or for some artistry representation of the design, and also to conduct reviews. So virtual online reviews with the stakeholders so that you have clarity of understanding of not only what the question is, but what the purpose and the answer is. Then the typical BIM uses are those you may see more during construction. So schedule simulation, cost estimation, various types of analysis. Clash detection is kind of the one that happens both during design and throughout construction. There's a synergy of who's doing it and why it's being done, and how do you address those clashes? That's always one of those questions. And then those green ones are the ones that could be done but aren't always done. But I always like to dwell on the operations asset management, because that's your full life cycle BIM, and often your BIM project won't touch on that. But the owners, as they're becoming more BIM aware, they're looking at their built form saying, well, hey, I'm in a space right now. Why don't we get our consultants to BIM this first and then do the design, the renovation, the addition, the alteration? So they're coming at BIM from the management of their already built assets and trying to infuse that into this world of connectivity, as well as to pass information along to their supply chain as they start the design, construct, and then operate life cycle. We talked about software within the industry, and there's a lot of software. So this is that, BIM is equal to Revit. Well, it absolutely is not. BIM is a process, as we said in the definition. Revit is a tool, one of the softwares that are available. We have building software, plant software, and civil software, and that's basically the divide in most of your software vendors. And then the green ones are the tools that are available. So you can see on the building side, IBI is deployed Revit, but there's all the others that could be used. On the plant side, IBI is exploring Autodesk's Plant 3D, but again, there's all the other ones. And then on the civil side, we have a mix of Civil 3D with some inroads. Now, the reason there's this split is more so because of the analysis and the data. So when you're analyzing information in a civil model, the information that's available for cut-fill analysis, volumes and surface areas of the various stratifications of your site are very different than your building's volume of concrete, length of steel, length of surface area of walls, for example. And then on the plant side, it focuses really on piping and placement of both gravity and pressurized pipe in linear projects or in plant building projects. But it allows you to do the pipe stress analysis and look for breaks in the pipes relative to what's flowing in the pipe, the material of the pipe, and the pressures. So there's a lot of intelligence built into how to analyze the model generated within those tools. So depending on the nature of your project, if it's a pure building, then you'd almost say it's easier than if it's encompassing a multiple gambit of these tools. But regardless, you want to find what that right solution is, encapsulate it around your platform. That would be your CAD, whether it's AutoCAD or MicroStation, your data reporting, your model review tool, your collaboration tools, and your hardware. And then you focus on where the information is going and how you're getting it there. And that's the biggest question from the BIM world. Does your owner want PDFs? Do they want CAD files? Do they want BIM models? Do they want data sheets? Do they want specific elements to have specific types of information? And are there other repositories, like in the States, if we're doing civil work, sometimes the state has a GIS database. And are they looking to pull information specific to a statewide or a national-wide, provincial-wide repository of information? All great and valid questions that should be asked up front on a project. Last time we talked about collaboration, and there was a long presentation, but the takeaway was this, really. Answer these questions and you're probably rocking on your project, but what is being shared? CAD, models, Revit, databases, non-CAD, other, just what's being shared? And if we don't have an answer to that, we need an answer to that. That's the critical question. Then how many locations? Multiple offices across the globe, a couple offices that are very close to each other. Are there external entities involved? Whatever the answer to those first two questions are will really drive not only the available solutions, but how the solution can actually be molded together. Then, who's leading it? That's what this call is about. Who's that project BIM lead? What are they going to do? How are they going to govern this? And then what's the action plan? So design the right solution, implement it. Is there training? Is there going to be IT dependencies that have to be built? So networking, internet, separate systems, whatever the solution is there a burden that has to be satisfied in order to deploy it? So this presentation is now focusing on, what's the makeup of the team and how are we going to lead it? And before I go on, I did want to launch one poll. I wanted to just hear from everybody. Simple question. Has a project BIM leader been implemented on projects that you have seen? So the question is up there. If you can say, yes, you've always seen it, sometimes or never. I would just be interested in seeing the distribution here. So I'll just give a couple more seconds here. About half of you have voted. Give it a couple more. Okay, so it's slowing down. So it looks like roughly, and it's what I thought, sometimes is the winner here. So it's interesting, we've got 20% always, which is great, 62% sometimes, and 18% never. So that's, the never is scary, the sometimes is less scary. So that's very interesting. Okay, thank you everybody for participating in that. We want it to be always. That's the goal of this. So let's talk a bit about this. So when we're planning our teams, the question is, how complicated is the project? These are just some base ideas. This is from the UK. These are the questions they ask. The experience level of the staff. Do you need BIM software champion? So are we doing something special with a new piece of software? Are we doing something special with existing software? And just think of the tools you use today and imagine if somebody threw a wrench into that and just augmented it just a little bit. What does that mean? The term studio BIM lead, office BIM champion, office point of contact. There's a lot of semantic terms that'll be in this presentation. But the office lead, has somebody talked to that office BIM lead to say, hey, we're doing X. Does it sound different, out of place? What are the deliverables? And that's a big one. Has anybody talked about the deliverables? Is the client saying anything that would raise just even a smallest of flags saying, hey, that doesn't sound like the norm? And what is the norm is the next question as well. What are the applications? Are there client standards? And client standards are huge because oftentimes those might be just client CAD standards. So even if we're doing BIM and generating our drawings from BIM, the generation of those drawings have to be done in conformance to potentially could be very archaic 2D CAD standards, could be complementary 2D CAD standards. And then, is it a BIM project? And that's an interesting question. So is there management of information versus just utilization of software to make a 3D model? And it's irrelevant of the data behind. The last one, that's a UK term for your owner's requirements, and we'll talk a bit about EIRs later on, but is there a definition of what the owner or the client is expecting? And oftentimes I've seen, I'll say, dare I say, the easier projects is when the owner says, I don't care what's under the hood, just give me my drawings. That kind of gives us the freedom to explore BIM to the best of our own abilities. But more often than not now, owners are coming in with something. So, when we look at the tasks at hand, I like this one. As a project team, stick to your task, communicate. The splash screen is a Revit example of, communicate via that front page of the model, identify issues, report problems, communicate new requirements or requests. So every time, and that's an important one, we start a project, we're well underway, something comes up. It's never perfect, and that's okay. But as long as any new requirements or adjustments that are discovered, communicate that. Engage your office BIM coordinators or your studio BIM leads to ensure that there is that synergy and that you're not inventing something else that maybe somebody's already done within your office, or through the office BIM coordinator connections, maybe it's been done in another office in another region. Harness the global nature of the firm. Our standards. Why reinvent the wheel if we already have something globally deployed? Revit, along with other tools, give warnings. saying, hey, you modeled something, but it's not quite closing correctly, or it's not quite looking right. Address it, right? Do what it says. And then Revit, along with all your other tools, doesn't have an artificial intelligence, and I really like that. So it's all about us still. We have to use our own brains to understand that even though there's intelligent applications, it's not doing the thinking for us. And that's a very critical piece. And the example I like to use there is, well, we discovered a clash. Why didn't BIM fix it? Well, BIM doesn't know what to do. The disciplines have to know what to do. This is from the Institute for BIM in Canada's practice manual. And what I liked about this is it explains that there are various levels of expertise when it comes to BIM. So we try to build global governance within the firm, but when we're setting at the project level, you'll have some BIM champions, so people who can be a project BIM leader, where you can just set them off on the project and they'll be good to go, whereas you'll have others that will need some guidance, some back and forth and some discussion, and that's all fine. You'll have BIM users who can really push what's being set on the project, and as long as they're guided for the overall governance at the project level, they'll be good. And then the awareness is something where we want to make sure that the BIM awareness is prevalent across the entire project. Now, if you're saying, well, we're not doing a BIM project, well, there's always some digital information. So if it's full BIM, 3D modeling with partial data, if it's just CAD, be cognizant of the fact that there's decisions that have to be made in order to meet client requirements, whether they're fundamentally simple, in air quotes, with the 2D world, or incredibly complex with BIM and data management. We provide corporate governance as well. So again, this is from the same Institute for BIM in Canada BIM practice manual, but it talks about the importance of having strategic as well as project level management and then production. And you can see there's a lot of roles that they're defining there, but the concept there is you want to make sure that we're not driving something new every single time at the project level. That makes us inefficient as a firm. So corporate governance, we look at standards, best practices, workflows relative to software types, relative to what we're doing and why we're doing and what we could do. Then at the project level, you need someone to manage what are the needs of the project. So we see the corporate governance. An example there is I have a Revit template. I have AutoCAD and Civil 3D templates. I have Penn tables. I don't want to make all of that stuff. But then you get to the project level and the client says, when you're modeling component X, it has to look like A, B, and C and have data value X, Y, Z. Well, that's not in our corporate standard. That's a very specific piece to the project. So we have to look at that, build that, manage that, and deploy that. And that's at the project level. Then at the production level, you have those who are modeling and making your drawings. And they've got to understand what our corporate standard is, what the project needs are, and how to be efficient at that project level in order to achieve it while meeting scope, schedule, and budget, ensuring quality and mitigating risk, all in the confines of project delivery. Now, those terms on the left, semantically, doesn't really matter what they are, but you can see I'm generically using the term the Project BIM Leader. You'll hear different terms potentially from joint venture partners, from subs or primes, regionally. It's all good. This here is in BS 1192, so this is the British standard in the UK, and in their PAS 1192-2 document, they define the terms at the bottom there where you've got your task team managers, those are really your discipline leads, your BIM authors who are your modelers, but they have an information manager and an interface manager. So somebody managing how all of the disciplines are coming together and somebody managing all of the information that's coming out of the disciplines. And there's a cycle of exchange between discipline lead, modelers, and these defined roles. So you can see I showed this slide not to make the world complex, just to show that semantically this role has been around for a while. These are all of the terms that I've heard the role to be called. So from my perspective, I don't really care what it's called, where you are, whether we're being driven by a prime, whether we're driven regionally by a government standard. The point is we need a point of accountability for all things CAD and BIM on a project. Whether it's one person or a team of people, it's no different than you coming to me as an architect saying, Brent, you're going to lead this building, and I'm going to do a whole host of tasks either by myself or preferably with a team, and we will achieve a deliverable and achieve a purpose. So hopefully one of these names you've seen in some form or another in the course of your career. Some of them are a little more unique than others, but they all do apply. This role also, I want to stress, does not work in isolation. And I think the biggest mistake I've seen is where people say, well, it's BIM. There's like this halo around BIM, and you put it up on a pedestal. Absolutely not. So anything that I do as a BIM lead has to be in conjunction with the project manager who's setting the execution plan, setting the purpose for the project, your interaction with the client and the owner, and that PM is accountable for all of us. Then some projects have design or engineering managers, so they perform design coordination, they validate what's the work breakdown structure, they schedule, they coordinate with subconsultants. There is an intriguing relationship because you have this BIM manager that interacts with those discipline modelers, whether we're in a prime sub relationship or whether we're harnessing our engineering and architectural disciplines internally, and we have to mitigate, again, it's scope, schedule, budget. I don't want to make people do more BIM if we're not contracted to do so, and there isn't a purpose for us to do that within the project. Conversely, I want to make sure people do more BIM if there's a requirement by the client that's driving a solution or driving an output, and we have to make sure that we're able to achieve that. Document controls, some of the larger projects have that where we got to take our deliverables, transmit them, submit them, cycle through the review comments, validate the to and from relative to those exchanges, project controls for scheduling and costing, project accountant for budgets and financial. Quality manager for me is also a very important one because when that's being deployed, BIM in essence should be enhancing the quality of the project, not hindering it. So a good relationship there between what we're trying to drive from a BIM perspective should be complementary to what's being driven from a quality perspective. So keep that in mind. Then, of course, your other disciplines and other leads. So we're driving a mode of thinking and a mode of behaving that's relative to how we're actually doing the work. All projects should have a point of accountability for all things CAD and BIM. That's like the takeaway. I think I'll keep iterating that throughout this presentation. If you look on any project and you don't know who's responsible, I would say that's a break, or that's a potential for a project level break. The role is scalable. So at the bottom here, we do have a link to a role description. It's quite comprehensive, and one of the comments I received once was, well, our project doesn't do all of that. I said, well, of course it doesn't. Not all projects will do all things BIM. So again, the quote simple BIM, that's where we're doing those base BIM goals. Somebody's got to be there and accountable for that. So who's going to assemble the model to run clashes? Who's going to make sure the template is right? Who's going to validate how the drawings look from maybe a CAD perspective relative to the client's requirement? Like, just who's doing all of that? Then the complex, it's even a bigger question. Who's going to make sure the data that's going to the fabricator is good enough to be fabricated on? That's a huge question and a huge potential for risk, especially if we're on a DB or a P3 project and we've contracted to say this data will go straight to a fabricator from our design models. That's very risky. So if you do see that in a contract, please pause and let's say, here, we're sure we want to do that. But that bottom half for complex, that's a huge undertaking and it needs to be accounted for. Regions of responsibility. So you've got this model, you have these multiple disciplines, and each discipline will have any number of leads and designers. So if it's multiple facilities, you may have multiple architects or engineers. If it's a single facility, you may have multiple designers, drafters, etc. It's all good. The idea is that you have this project manager, maybe design manager as well, overseeing one or multiple efforts, depending on the scale of the project. It could be a campus with multiple buildings, etc. And then focusing on the digital aspects of the information, you've got this Project BIM lead that builds this execution plan. That's that focus there. So they're not driving how should the building look, or when you have a clash where a duct is hitting a beam. They're not driving, well, raise the building to miss the duct, lower the duct to miss the beam. No, they're driving the digital interaction of that information and saying, there is a duct that hits the beam. This must be mitigated. Leads, manager, please, figure this out, because it shouldn't be hitting the beam. And that's your Project BIM lead, or whatever semantic term you apply. So the idea is it transcends the discipline and should be looked at and considered into and itself the discipline of BIM. That's what it is in the team makeup. It's this role, scoping the requirements, coordinating the team, championing whatever training is required through whatever various means there are, coaching, your single point of accountability. For me, that's the most important one. Whatever the scope and responsibility is scalable for your project, you have the point of accountability. So I've been alluding to the BIM execution plan, and I've been even in the previous sessions. And for me, this is a very, very important document. It's part of the overall project execution plan. I'm going to go through it, and often, actually I should have had another poll question. How many of you have seen an execution plan on your project? Oftentimes I'll hear, well, it's cumbersome and we haven't done it. But you may have done it verbally, even though it hasn't been written down. I would argue, the effort to put something on paper is so very important. So I've pulled up this slide on previous slides. And, formal or informal, you need a plan. You just need to know what you're BIMing and why are you BIMing it. And if it's just enough to say, pull the team into a meeting, have a dialogue about it, maybe fire an email or two to document it, I don't like that, but at least you know what you're BIMing and why you're BIMing it. More often when we get to larger projects, true BIM, we look at these, we grab these template documents. We have a North American template and a UK template, and we just answer the questions, and we'll go through some of this. Well, the point is to state your goals and what the uses are. So that wheel of BIM, what am I going to be doing with the model in order to achieve my goals? And then I'll hear, well, it's just CAD. Well, if it's just a CAD project, same concept, focus on the just CAD, state your goals and what you're going to do. Very simple. And if it's all IBI standard, well, then we have our standardized documentation that's globally deployed, and that can be applied. Critical is to ensure that the BIM goals are in alignment with project delivery. And I will say that over and over. Scope, schedule, budget, quality, risk. This is from your Institute of Project Management. If any one of those vertices fall off, the triangle fails. If you're doing too much relative to the scope of the project, you'll explode quality. If you're doing not enough, you'll implode, and either way, the whole thing fails. So BIM has to enhance the quality in support of scope, schedule, budget. So when we talk about BIM requirements, one of the first things we'll ask is, are there any external influences that are driving what we're doing? So in the UK, they call this the EIR, the Employer's Information Requirements. In North America and other parts of the globe, it just isn't anything defined. So this is from the UK BIM Task Group, and it's excellent. If we can't ask these questions, we're setting up the potential for failure. So does the client owner have any expectation for digital data turnover? Somebody has to be able to ask that question, and somebody has to be able to give an answer. The easiest answer is no, they don't. One of the most common answers are, yeah, they want PDF files, they may want CAD files, but because clients are becoming more aware of the fact that we do model, they've seen the Navisworks, they've probably driven through a BIM model, they'll start asking, hey, I want a Navisworks or a Navigator model. Or they'll say, yeah, give me those AutoCAD files, the Civil 3D model, give me the Revit model. And if we know that up front, then we're not worried about it at the back end where all of a sudden we're getting questions, should we turn it over, did we plan for it, did we budget it, is there a risk associated? No, we're planning that up front. If the client wants it, right away, is there a risk to turning it over? Do we want to? Do we want to maybe we're going to have a heavily advanced project and we don't want to give them our Revit, maybe we just want to give them an IFC file. All of those can be put upfront, planned for, prior to any modeling, prior to any effort, getting that understanding. And if you look under the technical requirements, software platforms is one that gets lost or forgotten sometimes. Sometimes they'll say they want a CAD file. Well, which one, AutoCAD or MicroStation? They want a BIM model. Well, what do they actually want? And if we're able to understand that and get all of that defined at the very beginning, the project will be so much smoother going forward. Now, there is a document, a UK template document for an employer's information requirement, and we've kind of adapted that for a more generic North American or rest of the world, where we take away the UK references, but we're just simply asking the questions. And we can sit with the clients to try to get the answers, or we can just help guide them through providing the responses that we seek. Next is the capability assessment. I'm just going to pause there to make sure there's no, okay, cool. The capability assessment is, are we able to do what we're saying we want to do? And I know it sounds silly, but I've seen many projects where oftentimes we'll take a jump from a BIM perspective and then find out, well, wait a minute, we're delivering from Office X and they've never been trained in Revit or Civil 3D. Or we're good, but our subconsultants are not. Or on the contractor side, yep, we're going to do all BIM, but our subcontractors don't know any BIM, or the supply chain doesn't. So we're asking for BIM model as part of the shop drawing submission. But they don't know how to do that. They're just going to give us PDF of a 2D drawing. So what do we do? So in the UK, again, this is from the UK. They want us to analyze, know who your project team is. So again, this is heavy interaction with your project manager. What's the makeup of the team? And ask these questions. So there's these assessment forms. What do they know about BIM? And that's a very important, we say we're going to do BIM, they nod their head. Are we nodding our heads for the same things? What's a BIM goal? What's a BIM use? What BIM tools have you used? Vertical infrastructure, linear infrastructure, do they know about data management? Have they delivered? Do they think they're efficient? All those good questions. Get them to assess themselves so that we can look at our supply chain, whether it's on the consultation side or contractors on the contracting side, to understand, yes, the BIM deliverables can be met, or there's going to be a problem. Then the IT assessment form. Now, again, this is a UK term, but that's essentially, do you have the IT infrastructure in place in order to facilitate? So we're going to use a collaboration system. Do they have access to it? We're going to use these 4 pieces of software. Do they have licenses? Is there internet connectivity? Are they going to have to move into the same building with us for the duration of the project? Is there a project site? All of those questions at the very beginning, because they will all inform how the information can be collaborated upon, commented, shared, etc. And then the resource assessment form will look at the capability of the users. If we all agree, you know what, yep, we've got licensing, we all know what BIM is, we're good, but we need training. Nobody's used Revit before. Nobody has used ProjectWise. Nobody has used MicroStation. Then at least we can identify up front. In order to succeed, a training regime will have to be put in place. And in that regime, we may define focused efforts in order to target the training to ensure success, complementary to the requirements of the project. So again, this is, for me, one of those important items where, when I look at my history in BIM projects and even heavy and customized CAD projects, we often skip over owner's requirements or more so these capability assessments. We just assume that we're preaching the talk, talking the BIM talk. We just assume that we have global capabilities that are synergistically in alignment with each other. So, capability assessment. Once you've done all of that, then, oh, my presentation has frozen here for a second. Sorry, bear with me. It's not advancing. There we go. Then we can start to think BIM execution plan. So the BIM execution plan, as a document itself, we use one of our templates. So in North America, I've said we've got this Penn State template. It's shepherded by Penn State University. It was, I believe, a PhD project several years ago. It's gained heavy traction in North America, and it's an excellent template to start from. Free, so you grab the template, standard sections, and it looks at, you know, who are your project information, key contacts, section on goals and uses, probably the biggest one. What do you need to do, and what are you going to do with the model to achieve that? And then what are the BIM processes required to achieve it in section F? And then what are the information exchanges? Then it talks about collaboration, infrastructure needs, model structure. So, you know, it's a very standardized form. If you look at that and you say, well, we have no clue, that's why you got to ask the questions. What are we doing? Is there information exchange? What's the process? And I'll show you some of the process maps momentarily. And it's to ensure there is clarity and understanding around how we're trying to do the work that we're saying we're going to do. In the UK, they have a template as well. It's shepherded by the Construction Project Information Committee. So the CPICs, and they split it up in two ways. They called it a pre-contract and a post-contract. And their PAS 1192, which is part of BS 1192, splits it into those two. So the pre-contract is basically saying, look at the owner's requirements, understand what the goals are to collaborate and share information, what's the data deliverable and the milestones, and then have that as a framework so you can then bid and tender the project, win it, and then post-contract plan the remaining contents of how you're going to do it. So very logical to that. What I like about the pre-contract concept is it says up front when you're bidding on projects, be cognizant of what the BIM needs are. And if you can understand that, then we can actually make that happen and plan accordingly, removing hopefully some of the surprises that would be in place. And if you look at the table of contents for the pre and the post, very similar to the Penn State. You know, again, some semantic differences relative to naming, but again, what's the project about? Goals, the uses you're going to use. It talks about the assessment, which the Penn State doesn't. Your collaboration or your common data, environment, so how are we sharing information, models and CAD files, and then naming structures, etc. So what I love about these plans is we have two templates. They are very similar, but they're also specifically catered for the regional needs. So from an IBI perspective, we have grabbed both templates and we've somewhat customize them just to make sure that we're in synergy as much as possible across the globe, and we've IBI'd them just a little bit from a branding and consistency perspective. In the Penn State, it looks at BIM uses, and it just says, you know, depending on what your use is, you're either going to be gathering, generating information, analyzing, communicating, or realizing. And that's how it's divided the use of the model. And I thought, you know, it's good to show that just for you to conceptualize, you know, in the design world, we're going to most likely be, we're heavily in the middle there. The realizing is more in the construction world. And, you know, to think about this, you know, you could do anything with BIM, and I think that's the important message, that, you know, as long as there's a purpose on the project and it's enhancing what we need to do to deliver, anything is really at your disposal. So it looks at these uses and it says, you know, if I'm gathering items, you know, I want to be able to capture, quantify, monitor, and then qualify what I've captured, and it goes through the various phases and says, depending on what uses I'm doing, am I doing quantity takeoffs? Am I doing programmatic? Am I examining and evaluating? Am I simulating? Am I predicting? BIM is supposed to help facilitate that design process. And if it's not, if BIM has become a burden, and if it's a software burden, step back and reanalyze, again, what are you BIMing and why are you BIMing it? Because if you're drowning in the minutiae of technical obscurity, we're missing the point of BIM as a whole because it's not enhancing what we're doing. We talk a bit about level of development, or LOD. And this is heavy, because this term, and I mentioned it on previous ones, this term has made its way into some contracts. Can you promise LOD 300? Contractors will say, can you do more? Let's make you do LOD 350. And the differentiation there is kind of what I show there. In the design firm, we want to get up to 300. And I say 300 is just enough to say it's enough for us to make drawings out of. It's enough for us to have elements that are geospatially located correctly relative to each other, and you kind of know what the item is. The example of a steel column and a steel beam. 300 is you have a beam going into a column. 350 is I have a designed connection detail from a shop drawing stamped so that it's fit for purpose. So that's kind of that delineation between what we designed versus how it's to be fabricated versus then in the 400 world how it is to be installed. So just be cognizant of that. I've been on several discussions where they say, oh, just do a little more. Sign the dotted line for 350. Some RFPs have said do an LOD 500 model, and that's just their one big red flag right there from a designer's perspective. So be cognizant of level of development. We have templates, so this is in North America. We have template LOD matrices that we're pulling together. The concept of an LOD matrix is to say, these are the items, superstructure, substructure, civil, linear infrastructure, etc. Give you a classification code. This is just showing uniformat, but think back to session 4. There's uniformat, uniclass, omniclass, master format, etc. So we're going to have an LOD matrix with all of those available. Select what you need or completely disregard. Description of the system, who's responsible for it, what discipline, and then at various stages of the project, whether you're at 30, 60, 90, 100, whatever your milestones are, and don't get bogged down in the semantics of the milestone on this image. It'll say the item is at a 100, 200, or 300 level. Beyond into construction, it would then go up to 400, etc. The UK has an equivalent. It's called the Master Information Delivery Plan. Same concept, though. Who's accountable for what parts of the model, and at what stage of development will they be throughout the life cycle of the project. And again, we're working to have a proper template of this that's available for BIM leads to grab and augment accordingly. We have some civil linear infrastructure projects where they've actually looked at, well, what does LOD 300 mean for certain civil systems or elements? And this was done on our Viva project, and it kind of slipped its way into a couple other projects. But it's a great example to say, well, you know what? Looking at the Penn State document, it seems very building focused. Well, what does it mean to do 3D or BIM modeling for civil components? And analyze that. What would you model? How much information? What does it look like? And that's kind of the exercise that was done here for the Viva project that can then be furthered and advanced for some other projects. And in the BIM execution plan, it asks for goals to be defined. And these are just some examples where it says, here's the goal, creating a coordinated multidiscipline 3D model with enough detail. And then what are the uses I'm going to use? Authoring, reviews, and coordination. So every single discipline will be doing a 3D model with elements of data attached to it. We can then bring all that information together and provide 3D coordination, multidiscipline coordination. Just a couple other examples here. And you know, the idea, if you look at some of these BIM goals, they're not very complex, but they are what's required from a design perspective in order to facilitate or enhance the quality of the deliverable or enhance the effort that's being done from a design level. Now, if you looked at a contractor's version of a BIM execution plan, what they may call a VDC execution plan, you'll see a lot more goals. Provide a 4D schedule simulation harnessing the BIM models turned over by the designer. It's a good goal, puts a huge burden on us because then they're going to make sure that the data they get from us is correct or adequate enough for them to achieve their goals, and then they'll have different uses available. So depending on what level or what stage throughout the life cycle you are, these BIM goals will be augmented accordingly. It also asks for, whether in the North America or the UK, there's a BIM use table. So what are the uses you're going to use throughout the various stages of the project? And again, I'm only showing, this is an example from a design project, because more often than not, even if we're on a design build or a P3 project, we're often only authoring the design portion of the BIM execution plan and feeding that to another entity who will be enhancing it to include construction and operation. Now, if we are pursuing the asset management piece in a collaborative effort with the intelligence sector, then we may have elements on the operate side, for example, asset management, building system analysis, where we're then trying to take our BIM model and feed it into the operate side. So there's some exciting opportunities there that we did talk about during the asset management session. Now, I said don't get caught up on the phases. I pulled this together a while back, and I just wanted to show this. So those highlighted portions, so the REBA 2013 stages, stage 1 to 7, or the AIA project definitions, so PD, SD, DD, CD. Those are the ones that are probably the most common, but transcending all of those are your present complete. So it's a rough mapping, but there's various phases depending on the type of project. We may one day have a heavy industrial engineering project where they say, well, now you're doing feed. Well, that's kind of where front-end engineering ended up, and then detailed design followed suit. So if we're working for the Army Corps of Engineers, they have different terms, etc. So it's just a matter of, semantically, we have different phases scattered across the globe or the industries, but they all boil down to roughly the same percent complete, and there is a lot of similarity across those project phases. So be cognizant of that. If I'm doing a model at 30% design, it's not going to be the full level of development as it would be when it's finished. So if we're being pressed, an example there, if the contractor is saying, I want to take your model for quantities, yet we're at 30% design, there has to be that understanding that if they take our 30% model, it will not potentially be as complete as required to get adequate quantities for cost estimating. And that dialogue has to occur throughout the BIM leads. Consider your data turnover requirements. And again, that goes right back to those initial owner's requirements. Do you expect anything? Simple. I want your PDFs. That's the beautiful project. There's no fear for inadequate turnover. It's just consistent PDFs, and that in itself is sometimes a challenge, but consistent PDFs to the client. UK has defined what they call COBE data drops. So if you remember from previous sessions, COBE is Construction Operation and Building Information Exchange. So it's focused more on facilities management, and they have a predefined definition of the 5 data drops. And a data drop in North American terms is just a data deliverable or a turnover of information. So the UK has it defined. Most clients, if they expect data, they'll have it listed in some form or another, and oftentimes it's the end of project deliverable. But if that's the case, I'd recommend, even at 30, 60, 90, or at some point in the middle, say, hey, by the way, this is what the data turnover is going to look like. Is it fit for purpose? Just to make sure the expectation is set and the deliverable can actually be met. So we're going to go through some of the process maps now, and this is specific here to the Penn state, so I do apologize for those in the UK here, but I think the purpose is still good. The Penn state said they want to look at the BIM execution process for the various uses required to achieve the goals. So that means, if I'm trying to my goal is make a coordinated model. Simple goal, probably the most common goal for any BIM project. How am I going to do that? I may use clash detection. I'm going to use the model for design authoring. I may do some virtual design review. Awesome. So you're going to do those 3 BIM uses. How are you going to do that? And then you get the blank, I don't know, we're going to do it. We're going to use a piece of software. Well, maybe, maybe not. So what they've done is they said, well, let's look at 2 levels. One level 1 process map is just your simple macro level, this is how we're going to do BIM. And the 16 level 2s look at some of the specific uses that they've defined. So This is their level 1 map, and I did a zoom in on some of these. So the idea here is it says, okay, great, how are you going to do BIM? So you're going to get a program from the owner, you're going to validate it, any type of model to feed into the program, so program-specific models will come in, you'll author your schematic design. Now, this is the out of the box. What I don't like about this is it says architect, architect, architect. Well, engineers are going to have the same schematic designs that they're going to author. So these are being augmented to be more IBI specific, but just these are the out of the box template ones. So you author schematic, then you perform some functions depending on what you're going to do on your project. You may have engineering analysis, a schedule simulation model by the contractor. You may be developing what Penn State calls a virtual prototype. So that's your mock-up, your review model. You may cost estimate, etc. And you have an output of schematic design. You have an output at the bottom of various static snapshots of your model, static snapshot of your cost estimate at that moment. Continue into design development, same process, you have your outputs. Continue into contract documents, you have your various outputs, and then you have a record model at the end of the day. And that's your overall generic BIM process. So if you sit back and say, yeah, that's kind of how we're going to do a project, that's the point, right? You're going to go through the phases, generate your deliverables, and then finish. That's essentially what this says to me. But when you dig deeper now, it'll say, great, in this level 2 design authoring, what does that mean? So it's going to start to look at and say, okay, you start the process again, look at what's required, look at the content that you need, start to develop your model, create the models, do you meet your requirements? No, repeat, yes, make your deliverable, and then continue. So it's kind of a simple process. Continue, does it meet the requirements, make your deliverable, continue. So it goes on from a design authoring perspective. So a lot of people, they get overwhelmed by these process maps, but when you just go through them, they're logical and simplistic to an extent, but then sometimes they don't say enough. And that's why from an IBI perspective, we're looking to enhance these, and we'll have companion UK ones as well to be used in conjunction with the BS 1192 standard. Design review, similar concept, start your process, grab a snapshot of the design model, and then you compile it, you review it for any operation and maintenance review, constructability review, perform your checks, repeat, deliver, etc. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to show that we've got some for each, for every single BIM use you could have, there's a template process map that we can pull from the Penn State that we can then augment. And as I said, we're augmenting these in IBI so that we have a global standard, so we can then look at this and say, do we understand what it's saying? So 4D schedule simulation, this is an important one to think about because this is something more so the contractor will do as opposed to the designer. So, this one we want to make, that middle one, 4D modeler, who is that? And this has come up on several projects. Are we required to do a 4D schedule simulation? Is it the contractor? What's our obligation? What's their obligation? And it goes right back to scope management and project management relative to don't do more than we have to do, and don't get drowned in the technological aspects of schedule simulation, especially if it's not our responsibility as designers. Similar with cost estimation. We can get quantities, but the contractor is really the one who's driving this entire process. And you can see here contractor is listed throughout the whole thing. Again, with record modeling, operations and maintenance, again, focusing on the facility manager, where do we play? And always ask those questions. If these are to be deployed, how are they to be deployed? An alternate example, just to show, this is one that was developed in the past where we said, instead of having an individual one, pull everything together. And we said, we'll grab information from the external entities, build our content, we come up and we model all the disciplines, we export whatever information required, run our clashes, and milestone our project. This example here, we said in the level 2 end, instead of having a different map for each one of these, schedule, quantity, building automation, analysis, etc. We said, well, you know what? We've got all this information. We're going to have a team kickoff with the manager. We'll have a BIM kickoff, start to build this model, do some coordination, and have this cyclic review of clashes and clash mitigation, and then you build outputs to a record model or to any one of these. So some projects, the simpler process maps or streamline maps are good, just to diagrammatically show what we're doing and why we're doing it. Other projects need more in-depth. So as I said, it's very scalable. I'm closing with this slide because that was a lot of information, and I know, and the feedback I've been given is, Brent, yeah, these presentations, there's a lot of stuff in there. If the biggest takeaway from this is what you're BIMing and why you're BIMing it, number one, and number two, every project should have a single point of accountability, regardless of what you call it, and then this slide. And this image is already put on the DT slide, the 4 steps. And I always say, we always jump right here to the end. Make that BIM execution plan. Have we asked the owner, do they have requirements? Have we assessed our team? And have we made an initial plan to gain buy-in before we get into the detail? Just follow those 4 steps. And if the answer is no requirements, yes, we're 100% capable, great. But at least you've asked the question in order to logically give the answer. So it's already implemented, and so if you're leaving this saying, well, Brent, are you proposing a brand new role for the projects? No. So it happens. Somebody's doing it. And when I say single point of accountability and you say, well, no, there isn't, you probably have 5 or 6 points of accountability. Maybe everybody is being accountable for a little piece of it. Who knows? By naming it, identifying that single point, ensuring scope, schedule, and budget are aligned accordingly. So they'll lead and oversee BIM and CAD on the project, set your goals, document it in the plan, interact with all the disciplines, and make sure everybody understands, make sure there's synergy of comprehension, lead the team where required. So think of Eglinton Crosstown. We have a team of about 3 people internal to IBI, 2 people SNC Lavalin. It's just that big. The BIM team is that big. Coordinate BIM and modeling issues, health check the models, perform coordinated advanced tasks. So interacting with external entities maybe, digital data turnover, coordinate the setup of CAD and BIM standards, the collaboration system, defining the collaboration systems. Think of the last session and the complexity around that, and then coordinating the output generation for consistency and quality assurance. And that's output being drawings, models, and or data, not just drawings. Engage this role from the very beginning. Minimal budget, if anything, is required in a proposal to look at it and say, yep, there's nothing concerning in the proposal versus, oh my God, I cannot believe what the client is asking. This will put a burden on our team. So very critical. Ask those questions. Get the project set up right, including the goal setting, budget expectations, and have this all done at the beginning, so that it's defined, it's understood, and it's properly implemented. I'm here to help regional technology leaders, local staff with BIM expertise, engage us. We're here to just hopefully try to make these, make us function as a very synergistic firm. Lastly here, again, it can be scaled. So I showed this earlier. BIM is not only for the most expensive or highest capital cost projects. Simple BIM happens all the time, and I've heard, well, we're just not being efficient. Most likely because we've started on the wrong foot, or something's being done. Maybe somebody just doesn't even know there's resources out there to connect to. So this role can be that bi-directional conduit between the design team and the resources that we do have available globally to tap onto. And then if it is a complex BIM project, all the more importance to make sure that somebody is actually guiding and governing this process. And then, well, do you budget it? So if it's happening today, that means it's happening in some form or another. So I've had, very early on in a project where we don't know what the budget is, I've done the work of sheet count. And I said, well, I've seen it in a previous employment, they used to say 40 hours of sheet architectural, 60 hours of sheet structural. We would say, well, 2 hours of sheet BIM. And it would kind of balance out. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but it was a good estimate as a starting point. You could take a percentage of a discipline effort. If it's thousands of sheets, then a little more thought might have to go in, so reach out for guidance. But when the project's won, or if, we've got to define the scope, define the budget. If we know that there's heavy BIM goals or more complex BIM goals, the effort will be heavier to define and set up, and then there has to be a continual effort. So somebody is looking, managing, and ensuring that things are going the way they're expected to be going. So we need to plan for that, account for that, and if there isn't a line item budget, then most likely it's just buried within the disciplines because it's there and it's happening today on all your projects in some form or another. And with that, I bring this session to a close. We've got 3 more that are coming up. The invite for case studies will come probably tomorrow, and that'll look at some examples from our buildings, infrastructure, and intelligence sectors. So thank you, everybody. Again, it was a jam-packed session. I'm just looking at the questions. I know we're at the top of the hour. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the question pane. I'll just give a couple more minutes. Or seconds if nobody has questions. Okay, just a reminder with your AIA number, I'll leave this on a couple more seconds here if somebody hasn't put in their AIA number yet. Okay, well, if there aren't any questions or if any come up afterwards, please feel free to email me or connect with me, and I will do everything I can. Oh, 1 minute, please. Okay, I will keep this line open now, so don't worry. But thank you, everybody, if you have no questions. All right. Thank you, everyone.